Hey beautiful people of the internet, happy Saturday. You know what that means. Let's get back to it. It is time again for Short Story Saturdays. So if you're new here, no judgment. First off, if you don't know what we're talking about, a Short Story Saturday is a thing I started doing back in the day where on Saturdays we talk about a specific short story. We all read it together as a group and I give you a quick little video that kind of talks about one thing about the story that caught my eye, or a thing that's kind of representative of what short stories as a genre can do at large. So first things first, while my hands are up like this, pause, go down in the description below, read The Rememberer by Aimee Bender. It's like a 2 to 3 minute read and it'll knock your freaking socks off. Is not a phrase I've ever said before. Go read the story and we'll come back here, we'll reconvene in 2 to 3 minutes and we'll talk about what's going on. Alright, now we are back and we're all on the same page. It's time to talk about The Rememberer by Aimee Bender. So this is a short story that was published in 1997, I believe. It feels a little bit more timely than that, but I guess that is now 21 years ago. That's insane to think about. You'll hear a lot about this story as kind of an instance of magic realism. Sometimes people will call it surreal. I don't really care a ton about those labels. This short story, for me, is much more important in terms of its length. So it's a short story. It's, I think, like 1,200 words, 1,300 words long. So The Rememberer is the story of a woman who is looking back on the past, the story is written in the past tense, and an odd change that overcame her lover. And the kind of way that it changed their relationship as well. So very obviously that odd change is that her lover experiences reverse evolution. He starts off as a human one day, and then over a very quick period of time he turns into a baboon, and then he turns into a number of different animals, moving backwards. The idea is he's moving backwards towards a one-celled organism. The narrator, who I like to refer to as the Rememberer, she is the one in this story who is doing the remembering. She's left alone at the end to remember. The Rememberer is writing back kind of on her experience and a very quick overview of what that time in her life looked like, and kind of the decisions that she had to make, or the state that event put her in. So at first, it kind of talks about what it was like to realize that you wake up one day and your lover is now an ape, and then to kind of come home and realize, like, oh, things are progressing very quickly. At one point she goes to a biologist and tries to figure out how much time she has left. The biologist is wrong, there's even less time than that. There's also kind of a flashback towards either the last day or a couple of the last days of when her lover was human. So it tells a little bit of that story, but then very quickly we flash back forward and Ben, her lover, is now a salamander. He is very near the end of his life. The Rememberer is doing her best to love Ben through this entire process. She's trying to kind of reimagine the boundaries of their relationship as every one of these devolutions or devolutions happens. But when he becomes a salamander, she kind of faces this choice, which is that soon Ben is going to be so small that the Rememberer cannot see him anymore, and she definitely can't take care of him. So what she does is she goes to the beach, and she releases the salamander into the sea, and she says goodbye. And that is pretty much it. That's the plot. It ends with this goodbye. So the place I want to start is that there is this idea a lot of times about a story, which is that the best stories are the ones that can surprise us. They can kind of bring us into this new feeling, this new surprising feeling. The problem is when we usually talk about a story being surprising, we, for some reason, revert very quickly to talking about plot. I think this is because of all of the TV that we've kind of that we've digested, and a certain mode of storytelling where the way that a writer can surprise us is by making something surprising happen. I'm here to disagree with that notion, and you probably are disagreeing with that notion too. In my experience, the best stories are the ones that don't surprise us with what happens, they surprise us with how we feel about what happens. It's almost as if what happens is inevitable. And that is the idea that we're going to be talking about today with The Rememberer. It's the inevitable. The best stories, in my opinion, put the inevitable right up front, and then they take you past it. They take you to some further place, which ends up being surprising in a different way, and we'll talk about that here in a second. The very first 2 lines of The Rememberer, quote unquote, "My lover is experiencing reverse evolution. I tell no one." That is a 1-2 punch of an intro to a story. So we used to do this exercise when I was teaching creative writing about, I would get these young writers to try and write the most interesting first line that they could, something that would really hook you as a reader. What almost always happened is they could come up with something similar to this, "My lover is experiencing reverse evolution." If I read that, I'm like, okay, that's an interesting plot. What almost never happened, a lot of times in this exercise, I would then ask them to write the next 3 lines. What almost never happened is that someone came up with something as good as that second sentence. "I tell no one." The rest of the first paragraph, if you'll reread that, is just an exercise in every line kind of taking it a step further into this area of disbelief. And the surprising and amazing thing is, honestly, if you put that surprising plot point right at the front, the reader will just kind of accept it because they have to. They're still learning the terms of the story. And so if, as you're introducing those terms, you put the crazy stuff right out there, the reader's more likely to accept it. So that's my idea, right? The best stories are the ones that don't surprise you with what happens. They surprise you with how they make you feel about what happens. But then again, what do I know? So let's back it up. Speaking of knowing, there is a section a little bit later down the page. The Rememberer says, "Last day I saw him human, he was sad about the world." And then a couple lines later she says, "On his last human day he said, 'Annie, don't you see? We're all getting too smart. Our brains are just getting bigger and bigger and the world dries up and dies when there's too much thought and not enough heart.'" Now, if you're like me, you read that line the first time you're reading the story. You read that line and you're like, yep, okay. Like, it's in my pocket. I now know what this story is about. I've just found the thesis statement. The problem with that, of course, is that Aimee Bender is way too smart for all of us. And that thesis statement is introduced about 1/3 of the way in. So we've got 2/3 of the story yet to try and complicate that thesis statement. And Aimee Bender is going to complicate it, just trust me. So if that's the idea, we're meant to kind of start believing, right? Well, there's too much thinking in this world. And the thing we're lacking is we're lacking some heart. We need to stop thinking and we need to just start feeling. What this story is going to do, and in my opinion, what it does very beautifully, is it's going to complicate that belief for us. A mere 4 paragraphs later, the Rememberer is talking about their last night together. "I stood up and kissed the entire back of his neck, covered that flesh, made wishes there because I knew no woman had ever been so thorough, had ever kissed every inch of his skin. I coated him. What did I wish for? I wished for good. That's all. Just good. My wishes became generalized long ago, in childhood. I learned quick the consequences of wishing specific." If you're paying attention, this paragraph, this seemingly very interpersonal paragraph, is a little bit actually of a counter thesis to what we just heard from Ben. This is the 2 not quite aligned beliefs between Ben and Annie, the Rememberer. Annie, in a way, is saying to Ben, by wishing on him and by kissing on him, there doesn't need to be this binary between thinking and feeling. I can do both. I recognize that it's not good to wish for specific things, to think too hard, but I also know that I'm not just here. You know, there's a use to wishing still. There is still a use to wishing. And so I don't overthink it. I don't just feel. I do a little bit of both. I wish for good. Her point is that it's not binary. It's not thinking or feeling. It's not accepting or fleeing. It's some place in the middle. If you're going to exist in this world, if you're going to continue existing, if you're going to be the one who makes it through and continues to remember, the one who continues on living, you're going to have to find that weird gray middle ground. Wishing for the Rememberer is that middle ground. Just a quick note, this is backed up a little bit when 2 or 3 paragraphs from the end, as the Rememberer is going to the beach to let Ben go. She notices the people laying on the beach. "Walking down the sand, I nod at people on towels, laying their bodies out to the sun and wishing." This is, again, she's kind of noticing that, like, how the general population gets through. It might not be beautiful. It might not be overthinking. It might not be overfeeling. It's just kind of residing in that middle ground. It's surviving. It's wishing. For better or for worse, we often think of our lives in terms of these arcs, right? We have a beginning, a middle, and an end. We don't know something, and then we learn, and we arrive at a new place where we have learned and we have new knowledge. We notice that we're lacking something, we wish, and then we arrive at the place where we, either get the thing we want or we don't get the thing we want. Problem solved, right? We've gone from one place to the next. We've overcome. These are the arcs that we get from popular television, honestly, even popular writing quite a bit. Like a self-help book is that arc, that's for sure. But Aimee Bender knows better. She knows that if you're going to tell that arc, you're going to leave a lot of people out of that conversation. That to live kind of in the moment of these human lives that we live is to not feel that arc very often. So often that arc actually goes the other way, or it's not an arc at all. This story, if you really look at it, it begins in this place of inevitability, of knowing, of like it ends at the end of the arc, or it begins at the end of the arc that we're used to. She starts with the inevitable, but she ends, well, I'll just read it to you and we'll see what she ends with. It's the last paragraph. Sometimes I think he'll wash up on shore, a naked man with a startled look who has been to history and back. I keep my eyes on the newspaper. I make sure my phone number is listed. I walk around the block at night in case he doesn't quite remember which house it is. I feed the birds outside, and sometimes, before I put my one self to bed, I place my hands around my skull to see if it's growing, and wonder what, of any use, would fill it if it did. So, the thing that happens in that last paragraph, which can be a little hard to talk about, is that the rememberer who has been writing in the past suddenly she switches to the present, and she starts entertaining possibilities. So the inevitable has already happened, and then this story specifically moves one paragraph beyond the inevitable, and it goes to the what if. The language in this paragraph, for instance, sometimes, in case, if shows up about 4 different times. I wonder. The crazy thing about the Rememberer, at least in my opinion, is that it kind of flips on its head this arc that we're really used to. And it even flips on its head this arc that we see a lot in other stories. It starts with the inevitable, with this crazy, crazy thing that has happened, and therefore will kind of, it'll rule the rest of the story. Like, my lover is experiencing reverse evolution, and I tell no one. You know how the rest of the story is going to go. But then we end in a place that to me is surprising. We end in this place of still holding out hope, of kind of, it's the opposite of, like, Annie isn't flipping a middle finger to Ben. She's not saying, you're completely wrong. She's saying, you might be wrong, and that's why I'm going to hold out hope. That's why I'm still going to wish. I'm not going to accept this inevitability, and I'm not going to flee from it. I'm going to exist in that middle, I'm going to stand my ground, and I'm going to wonder and wish. And if that isn't beautiful and heartbreaking, I don't know what is. This story in general, what a beautiful and heartbreaking one. I hope that you enjoyed it as much as I did. I think it has a ton to tell us about the way that we think about the arcs of stories, but also the way that we think about the arcs of our lives. So, anyways, I hope you enjoyed that. I absolutely loved getting to return to this story. If this was your first time, I'd love to hear kind of what you thought about this story. And if you've read it before, what did you learn this second time? I do have some cool news. The second story that we're going to do for this reinstallation, or the reintroduction of the Short Story Saturday, is going to be a little bit longer, but I'm super excited to talk about it. So the next short story, I'm going to put it down in the description below as well, is Big Two-Hearted River by Ernest Hemingway. This is you maybe read it before, this is a famous one, and I have lots to say about it, and I can't wait to hear what you all have to say as well. Thanks for coming with me back to Short Story Saturday land. We made it. We survived. If you've never seen one of these Short Story Saturday videos before, let me know what you think. How was it for you? I'm still kind of figuring this medium out. I've got a pretty good idea of what I'm doing, but I could always do better. So in the meantime, I will be putting out some other videos as well, so always check back for those. But I will see you all next Saturday, and you should go ahead and read Big Two-Hearted River down in the description below so that we can get ready for it. Alright, thanks for hanging out with me. I will see you guys soon. Best wishes! I remembered how the first time we had sex, I left the lights on. I kept my eyes wide open and concentrated really hard on letting go. Then I noticed that his eyes were open too, and in the middle of taking off my clothes, we sat down on the floor and had an hour-long conversation about poetry. It was all very peculiar. It was all very familiar.